Hi, I'm Dr. Jeff Pettis. I'm an entomologist, and I've worked with honeybees for over 40 years, and I've worked with USDA as an agricultural research scientist for over 20 years.
Awesome. Well, you know, at Terra Vera, we started the company with a mission to make agriculture more sustainable. And of course, a key part of that is protecting pollinators that are essential to not only our ecosystem, but to our food supply. So in this series, I'm looking forward to getting your insights and experiences on what's going on in the world of bees and how it relates to food supply. And really excited to have your thoughts to share with our viewers. So thank you very much for being with us.
Yep. Good to be with you. Yep.
Awesome. All right. So we've talked a lot about the trends, the alarming trends, I guess, in honeybees, managed honeybees, where we historically saw 10%. And then about 25 years ago, we started seeing the trends get into the 30s. We kind of managed Varroa with some options. And then over the last couple of years, we've seen increases in the colony losses that are probably not sustainable at these rates, given that beekeepers can't keep up once you get above 50%. So with all these decades of Varroa, it's amazing to me that we haven't found solutions that are doing what we need them to do to help the beekeeper. Could you talk, one, about how we got Varroa to begin with, and then, you know, maybe the evolution of how we've been treating for Varroa and why it may not be working today as well?
Okay. A lot of different pieces in this, but
sorry.
So Varroa mite is still a parasite of the Asian honeybee, Apis cerana, and we moved European honeybees into that area, and then we moved some queen honeybees from there that had Varroa into and started mixing our European bees with Asian bees. The mite transferred host, so now it's on a new host, which is our European honeybees, and our bees don't have the same kind of defenses. Your Asian honeybees have a great defense. When the Varroa mite goes into the cell and feeds on a worker honeybee, the worker honeybee dies, and so it kills the Varroa. It commits suicide. Our bees don't have that. Now, I wish they did, but that's also why we're having trouble with the breeding process. Apis cerana, the Asian honeybee, has a lot of natural defenses, and yet our European honeybees have been slower to develop those natural resistance. So we've relied on chemical treatment for a long time, and I can get into the chemical treatment. But so we keep using different chemicals, different ways of treating the hive, and if you do that, you also never let the bees develop natural resistance because you're always, helping them along, if you will. Yeah.
So in trying to help them, we may actually be hurting them in a way.
In a way,
Yeah,
we are.
in the long run. So
Yep.
it sounds, I don't want to get off topic of honeybees, but it sounds to me like phylloxera in viticulture. It sounds like there's a similar parallel, right? If I understand that correctly, we started with these vines in France. They were not exposed to phylloxera. We brought them to the U.S., and sure enough, these vines were, over time, developed resistance to phylloxera, and then phylloxera finds its way back to Europe, and lo and behold, those vines are not resistant at all to that particular pest. Is that for anybody who's a wine lover? Is that a similar?
Well, it is similar. I mean, the story is that if we had not gotten our American rootstock back into Europe, the wine industry would have collapsed. So all the good European grapes are grafted onto American or North American rootstock to fight this phylloxera. So yeah, it's so that's a hybrid. You can graft plants. You can't graft the two bees together. We got this other species of bee, Asian honeybee, and we've got European honeybees. I mean, you might be able to manipulate genes and get that suicide gene in there, but probably not. Actually, it's we're making progress in the breeding of resistant honeybees. It's just a slow process. So we still need alternatives that beekeepers can use today to control Varroa, and that's what we're talking about. I mean, the chemical treatments that we've had 3 synthetic chemical treatments, and the mites have developed resistance to all 3 now. So a standard chemical treatment, the mites will become resistant. We have 2 organic acids, formic and oxalic acid, which we think act almost physically on the mite. They don't attack the nervous system or anything. So it might be a little harder for the mites to become resistant, but there's applicator issues with both formic and oxalic as well.
So kind of getting back to what I call a biological control. So if you're trying to selectively kill the mite, which is a great goal to have, but you do it in a way that you don't get all of them, you kind of get what I would call the antibiotic effect. Is that right? That basically the more you use it, the more the mites that don't die are the ones that are inherently resilient or resistant to these compounds, and they're the ones that breed. And so now you have basically through evolution a defense mechanism that kind of keeps the mites from being completely eliminated. Is that more or less?
Yeah, that's. I mean, we're overusing in human health and everything. We're overusing antibiotics and driving the different pathogens to become super bugs of different types. And the same is true. We rely too heavily on a chemical treatment. We also never rotate. We use the same chemical over and over. Amitraz is the perfect example. Most of the commercial beekeepers in North America use Amitraz religiously, or whatever you want to call it, but they just use it over and over. Some are beginning to rotate, but by doing that, the pressure on the mite is such that, of course, it's going to develop resistance. And that's happening.
And so I kind of hear these stories where, using Amitraz or a similar treatment gets a result one year and then maybe not as good the next year. So you increase the frequency or the dose, and now you're chasing a problem that you're now exacerbating by the fact that you're kind of creating these resistance issues. Is that
very true? They in fact, that's been one of the responses, is just treat more often with the same compound. But that's very quickly a no-win situation.
So before we talk about a little bit more of the trade-offs or the treatment options, there's another parasitic mite that sounds a lot like Varroa, might have been in 30 years ago. So could you talk a little bit more about any current threats or potentially emerging threats?
Sure. So the mite you're referring to is Tropilelaps. There's 4 species. Some people call it the tropy mite, but Tropilelaps, it's again from Asia. I'm not, but it's coexisted in Southeast Asia with Apis cerana, that Asian honeybee, for a long time. And in fact, when I've worked there, you just find it rarely in those colonies. It's there, but it's not causing a problem. Mm-hmm. We bring European bees into Asia, or the mite moves, and it really affects our European honeybees. So it was restricted to Southeast Asia for a long time. Now it's moved into Korea, it moved into China, it's moved into Afghanistan, it's moved across, it's in Azerbaijan, and I forgot, anyway, it's right on the doorstep of Eastern Europe. And so it's moving, and we don't understand why. And so there's a lot of concern. It's very similar to Varroa. So some of our treatments might work, but we need to understand that, and we need to do some testing against Tropilelaps. So it's a new pest, very similar to Varroa, feeds on the, it only feeds on the immature bee, but it can cause damage, and the same way Varroa does. So yeah, that's probably the number one new pest. Then we have things like Asian hornets. Some people heard about the murder hornets that came into Washington State that might have been eliminated. We hope they have. But there's some other hornets that just come into Georgia. So we as humans do trade or are causing more and more problems. And these 2 parasitic mites that we have in beekeeping, Varroa and Tropilelaps, are good examples of that.
Well, with what's going on, we talked about earlier about the colony losses and kind of being on this tipping point where if nutrition is off, then pesticide exposure is exacerbated in the fact that resistance to some of these Varroa treatments and then pathogens and the combination of those effects. But it sounds like if the tropy mite comes in, it sounds like if we were under control with our losses, that may not be as concerning. But with where we're at now, it almost seems like it could be pretty catastrophic.
It could be, because we're already, right at the point. It's hard to maintain. And once you reach that 50% threshold of losses, it's almost impossible. So yeah, we just don't need another pest or parasite right now. And Tropilelaps is a big threat.
So let's talk about the 2 common treatments. You said you have some experience with both formic and oxalic acid. Could you walk through the pluses and minuses and maybe the limitations of each of those?
Sure. I'll start with formic, I think, because it's a little easier to talk about. It acts as a vapor. The Europeans worked out 65% formic acid release. It causes minimal damage to the bees. You put it in the hive. The vapors are heavy, so they move down through the hive. They'll kill Varroa before they kill the bees, but they do kill the open brood. The open, unsealed brood, young larvae are often damaged with formic acid treatment. It has temperature range. It only works when the temperatures are in a certain range. So if it gives above 85 degrees Fahrenheit, you shouldn't use it because you can kill the queen. You get below that, it doesn't evaporate quickly enough to be effective. So formic has a temperature range issue, which means it limits when beekeepers can use it. Oxalic acid, we use it in several different forms, and there's new forms coming along. One is to fumigate with it. It seems to work pretty well, but there's applicator hazards. I mean, you really need to wear a respirator, and it can be cumbersome. Same with formic. Formic can burn your eyes and things, so you wear a respirator with formic acid as well. So the applicator doesn't like it so much. But oxalic, fumigation, and then the other way is we call it dribble. We dribble it in a light sugar syrup over the bees, and it's reasonably effective. There are new methods coming out with this kind of a slow release oxalic, and I think the jury's still out on those. They're somewhat effective, but again, those two tools together, at least they're both accepted as being organic for the beekeeping industry, which is a good thing. But they have issues somewhat for the bees and also for the beekeeper in applying them, when they can apply them. And if you have a lot of labor, unless you're a big commercial beekeeper, you have to worry about your workers' safety in that case, because people can get burned with both compounds.
I've also seen some research that seems to indicate that there may be more damage or harm in the long run. You may not see bee mortality, but particularly from oxalic, that some of the research is showing that there's some downsides to that if you trace that over time. Is that?
I think that's true. Because we're learning more and more about oxalic. In the past, we thought it was kind of benign, so people would apply it a lot throughout the season. And yet, like you say, some of the studies are coming out saying it does have long-term effects. If you overuse the product, it can damage the bees in ways that we don't probably fully understand yet.
And tell me a little about the experience of wearing a respirator in a bee bonnet. And I mean, that's got to be, especially in the heat of often when you're treating.
There's my bee bells back there. First of all, I mean, it's hot. It's hot just wearing the bee suit regardless in the spring, late spring, all through summer. And then you have to put on a respirator, and you have to wear gloves. You can't wear the leather gloves because the product can seep through the leather gloves. You have to wear protective nitrile gloves or something. It's to do it properly, it's very heavy. I mean, it's just a heavy requirement. And the main thing is that you look at the weather report, you think, okay, the weather's going to be okay, and yet it gets hotter right after you apply it. Those formic in particular vapors we know we get queen loss with high formic vapors in the hive. So you're just trying to hit that sweet spot in getting enough evaporation with formic and not killing yourself and not killing the bees.
Yeah, I've talked to some breeders of queens, and they seem to have even more concerns than most about how they treat or what their treatment options are. Could you talk about that particular aspect of beekeeping?
So queen breeders, and they produce package bees as well. They're just growing extra bees. But to produce queens, you need really strong colonies, and you can't have anything that's going to interfere with that colony trying to raise a bunch of new queens. So the queen breeders that I know in Northern California and the southeastern U.S., they're very particular about how they manage those. We call them cell builders, building new queen cells. And you couldn't treat with formic, you couldn't treat with oxalic anytime during the queen ring process. Amitraz, we've shown, can damage the drone population. So, and we need good, healthy drones to mate with the queens. So there's a lot of issues in queen rearing. They need a good, safe product. And actually, we just finished a little test in Georgia where I actually applied some of the Terra Vera solutions directly in the queen cells, and I fumigated queen cells, and we saw zero effect. That was the most amazing safety part that I've seen yet with the ApiVera, I should say, ApiVera products that we've looked at so far. In the queen ring process, at least right now, it looks like it's a completely safe product, which is really nice to hear. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I know we're going to dig deeper into that in a future episode and talk more about what some of the cutting edge treatments might look like. But if I was to kind of sum up some of what I heard you share, it sounds like with the losses we're seeing, queen breeding is more important than ever. And even for the regular commercial beekeeper, the treatment options are becoming less effective. For the queen breeders, it sounds like they're really in a hard place where they're having a hard time keeping up with demand, and at the same time, looks like all of the options are pretty fraught with trade-offs, if not unavailable to them. So it sounds like that might be a good place for us to start thinking about, where we need new treatment options.
Yeah. One thing we haven't even spoken at all about is when you use these synthetic compounds, whether it's fluvalinate, coumaphos, or amitraz, you're going to get those products moving into the beeswax, and you're going to get some accumulation, and that can have an effect too. We haven't done a lot of testing on that, but we know it does have an effect. So the more you use a product, the mites become resistant, and you end up with more contamination in your comb. So we need non-toxic products to use. Yeah. Yeah.
So one more, I guess, item coming back to, I know we talked a little bit about beekeeper safety. Is there anything else that you see as a concern beyond the beekeeper safety and the bees themselves? Obviously, any environmental issues or risks with any of these other treatment options that you think might also be noteworthy?
Not if used properly, like even the strips with the chemicals, as long as people are using them responsibly and then disposing them responsibly, not really. Again, of the two organic acids, the concern about the beekeeper and using it at a time when it's not going to affect the bees is a huge concern. And I think with oxalic, there's stuff that we still don't understand. Like you mentioned, long-term use may be causing harm to the colony. The other thing is you don't smell the oxalic as much as you do with formic. Formic, if it's present. With oxalic, you can get human exposure without knowing it. And I think that's a huge danger. People, I think, are more lax with oxalic, and they shouldn't be. It can cause harm to the applicator.
Yeah, I've seen that with some beekeepers that seem to have a casual, I guess, notion of, is this really a safety issue? Then I've seen folks on the other end of the spectrum who say that they've treated with oxalic historically, and they now will not just when they're restricted for, honey supers, but just in general, they've had some reaction. So it seems like that's an emerging issue, is just really understanding both the human health impact as well as overall colony impact.
The impact on bees, yeah. I think you're right. Yeah. In fact, I heard one commercial beekeeper just recently, we were talking about these recent losses in California in January and February and March, and he had made a statement about people using formic at a certain time of the year or oxalic at a certain time of the year too much. He thought that was involved in some of the losses, and it could be. It would take some testing to prove it, but it certainly could be some of the issue.
Yeah, that'd be sad and ironic, I guess, if folks were trying to help their bees and ended up hurting them. But yeah, we'll save that for another topic and definitely get into a little bit more into some of the alternative treatment methods that are emerging and get your thoughts on that. But want to thank you for learning more about Varroa, and after all these decades, still the number one stressor that we're worried about, it sounds like.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you, Jeff.